Why fighting Gilbert Burns is a bad idea for Jorge Masvidal. So if you guys don't know who Jorge Masvidal is, let me give you a quick rundown and get you up to date. Jorge Masvidal was born in the rough streets of Miami, Florida. He was raised in a rough area where he saw crime and violence firsthand. Masvidal turned to martial arts as an outlet to channel his energy and keep him out of trouble. Masvidal would find success getting into street fights. He was known for beating one of Kimbo Slice's protege fighters named Ray. Their first fight was a brawl and was entertaining to say the least. Jorge and Ray would go on to fight for the second time, and Masvidal would get the win again. Masvidal made his martial arts professional debut in 2003, which marked the beginning of his path to the UFC. He competed in Bodog Fight, Strikeforce, and Bellator MMA, among other organizations. With his explosive hitting and grappling abilities, he immediately established a reputation as a dangerous fighter. In 2013, he had his first debut fight in the UFC. A year later, his best friend at the time, Colby Covington, would also join the UFC. They would go on to have great success early in their career. Jorge Masvidal would start his early career at lightweight, getting 5 wins and 2 losses. In 2015, Jorge moved up to welterweight after losing to Al Iaquinta. Another thing I would like to mention is Jorge also could not cut weight to 155 anymore because of the ban of the IV drip rule, where fighters use IVs to restore dehydration and bring back the electrolytes they need in order to fight. After losing to Al Iaquinta, Jorge would fight in the Ultimate Fighter 21, where he would beat Cesar Ferreira via KO. The Ultimate Fighter is a reality TV show that follows a group of MMA fighters as they compete in a tournament-style competition for a contract with the UFC. The show typically features 2 teams of fighters, each led by a UFC coach, who live and train together in a house for the duration of the season. The fighters participate in challenges and complete weekly fights, with the losers being eliminated from the competition. Jorge's next fight would be against Benson Henderson, in which he would lose via split decision. Masvidal would start the new year with a split decision loss over Lawrence Larkin, but then would go on a 2-fight winning streak, beating Ross Pearson and Jake Ellenberger. 2017 was a rough year for Masvidal. At this point of his career, Masvidal was just getting wins and losses, and he was not really a draw to the UFC. He would get a win over Donald Cerrone, and would lose against Damian Maia and Stephen Thompson. In 2018, Masvidal left the scene, going on to pursue other things like a reality TV show called Exalton, a reality competition series where 2 teams of physically fit contestants compete against each other. 2019 came around, and this was the best year for Masvidal. He started the year off with a bang and KO'd the rising prospect at the time, Darren Till, in his own hometown in London, in which Darren was the -260 favorite. After the bout against Darren Till, during a backstage interview, Leon Edwards and Jorge would get into an exchange. This is where he hit Leon with the infamous 3-piece soda. His next fight would be against Ben Askren. Well, we all know what happened in that fight. Masvidal knocks out Ben Askren in 5 seconds in the very first round, which is the fastest knockout in UFC history. His next fight would be a super fight against Nate Diaz. They were fighting for the BMF belt, which stands for the baddest mother. The UFC created the BMF belt ahead of the fight between Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz at UFC 244 in November 2019. The belt was a huge success, and it added an extra layer of excitement and intrigue to the matchup. Eventually, Jorge would get the win over Nate Diaz because of a doctor stoppage. Jorge would get Fighter of the Year in 2019 and the UFC cover for the UFC 4 game alongside the Stylebender. This was by far the best year for the Miami fighter. In 2020, Jorge got the chance to fight for the title against Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman was supposed to originally fight Gilbert Burns, but then the fight got cancelled due to Gilbert having COVID. And on 6 days' notice, Jorge stepped in and exceeded everyone's expectations by losing via decision and going the full 5 rounds against Kamaru Usman, which is surprising because with only 6 days' notice, Masvidal stood a chance against the reigning welterweight. In 2021, Masvidal had really high expectations of beating Kamaru Usman, because when he fought Kamaru in 2020, he lost, but it went to a decision, and he did not have a full training camp to beat him. But to Masvidal's surprise, Kamaru knocked out Masvidal in the 2nd round. Masvidal was supposed to fight Leon Edwards next, but the fight got cancelled. Instead, in 2022, he fought his former best friend Colby Covington, now turned enemy, and the fight was a dominant performance by Colby Covington, destroying him on the ground and having his moments on the feet. Most people thought the beef between them might have been over since they already fought in the octagon. But instead, 2 weeks later, Masvidal took the beef at a Miami steakhouse. He snuck behind Colby wearing a mask and struck Colby in the mouth. causing Colby to have a chipped tooth. Masvidal was later then arrested, and Jorge didn't really seem to care at all during his arrest. Now here we are. Jorge is currently on a 3-fight losing streak, but in fairness, it was against the top guys. But I personally do not think the fight with Burns is a fair matchup. Firstly, it's important to consider the physical toll that a fight takes on a fighter's body. Masvidal, who is currently 38 years old, has been fighting professionally for over 20 years. He has also taken significant damage in some of his fights, in particular his last 2 against Kamaru and Colby. They have been physically grueling affairs that could have long-term effects on his health. It may be wise for Masvidal to take some time off and recover, and avoid further damage to his body. Masvidal faces a special challenge from Burns that could ruin his career. Burns is a talented grappler with world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background, while Masvidal is recognized for his striking. Burns could be capable of controlling Masvidal and submitting him if the battle ended up on the ground. Just look at what he did to Neil Magny. Masvidal has tremendous grappling experience, but it might not be enough to fully prepare him for Burns' level of grappling. Losing to Burns might seriously harm Masvidal's career and jeopardize his chances of winning the championship belt. Additionally, there are other welterweight contenders such as Jeff Neal and fighting Stephen Thompson for the second time, who could provide Masvidal with a tough but winnable matchup. Fighting one of these opponents could help Masvidal build momentum and confidence to get himself back at the top. Gilbert, as of now, has fought the toughest fighters in the division. Just in his last 3 fights, Gilbert has fought Kamaru Usman and dropped Kamaru in the beginning of the round, the rising prospect Khamzat Chimaev, and as of recently, submitted Neil Magny. This fight for Jorge will definitely be a tough one. While a fight between Jorge Masvidal and Gilbert would undoubtedly be an exciting matchup, there are several reasons why Masvidal should not take this fight at the time. Masvidal has already taken significant damage in recent fights and should take time to recover and avoid further damage. Additionally, Burns poses a unique challenge to Masvidal that could derail his career and is hyped for UFC fans. Ultimately, the decision on whether or not to take the fight rests with Masvidal, but it is important to consider all the potential risks and benefits before making a decision.